Many of you are waiting for a sign, but what if I told you that the sign is not coming? What if I told you the sign is already here, and that this message right now is not a coincidence? We live in an age of noise, distractions so loud that they silence the most important voice, the one within you. Yet, when God sends a warning, he does not shout. He speaks in the silence, in nature, in suffering, in synchronicities, and now in urgency. Before June 25, 2025, something will shift, not necessarily in the world, but within you. This is not a prediction, it is an invitation, a divine call for alignment before your soul misses the path it was meant to walk. He who waits for the perfect time will spend his life waiting. He who listens deeply, even once, will awaken eternity. Shi Heng Yi, the greatest deception we often fall into is believing that when God speaks, it will be loud, catastrophic, theatrical, undeniable. That lightning will flash across the sky, that voices will thunder from clouds, that angels will descend and the ground will shake. But those are the dramatics of a distracted mind, not the reality of divine communication. Because when the Creator speaks to a soul, he does not need volume. He requires attention. The truth is, the warning has already been delivered, not once, not twice, but many times. It came when your heart was restless in the middle of the night for no reason. It came when life whispered to you through repeated patterns, relationships breaking the same way, opportunities fading the same way, time slipping through your fingers while your soul grew quieter and more distant. You thought it was coincidence. You thought it was stress, but it was not. It was the voice of the eternal echoing in your discomfort. It was a divine alarm clock trying to wake you from the illusion you've accepted as life. Every ignored feeling, every inner tug, every strange synchronicity that made you pause, was a message coded in silence. We want miracles, but we overlook the mystery in the ordinary. The sign you asked for was in your breath when you almost lost it in despair, and still chose to rise. The warning was in the dream that won't leave you alone, in the voice of the stranger who said exactly what you needed to hear, in the moment you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize yourself anymore. That was the message, but humanity, in its modern sleepwalking state, has grown deaf to the divine. We ask for signs, but forget that signs require sight, not with the eyes, but with the inner perception that only awakens through awareness, presence, and pain. Pain, too, is a messenger. God does not punish, he prompts. But if prompting is ignored, if nudges are denied, if the soul remains asleep, then the warnings grow sharper, heavier, more visible, because God loves you enough to disturb you. He loves you enough to break your comfort if your comfort is breaking your calling. The final warning is never an announcement. It is a culmination. It is everything you've already seen, heard, and felt but have dismissed, rationalized, or numbed away. It is the whisper behind the chaos. It is the repeated lesson you refused to learn. It is the still voice that said this is not your path, and you kept walking anyway. It is the grief you carry from a version of yourself you abandoned. Every missed opportunity, every delayed obedience, every ignored truth, they pile up and together they form what we call a warning, not because God threatens, but because he invites with urgency. And urgency is mercy for a drifting soul. The question is not, will a warning come? It is, have you already ignored it, and will you keep ignoring it? In the modern world, noise has become a constant companion. It is not just the noise of traffic, conversations, or digital alerts. It is the noise of thoughts, obligations, doubts, and fears. From the moment we wake up, our minds are already bombarded with external stimuli and internal chatter. The soul, in this storm, becomes buried under layers of mental dust, until one can no longer hear its cry. But the divine does not compete for attention. God does not scream above your notifications. He does not force himself into your schedule. Instead, he speaks in stillness, in the sacred, subtle space that lies just beneath the noise. It is a paradox. The more you chase after clarity, the more elusive it becomes. Yet, when you become still, when you pause, breathe, and observe, the answers often rise like the sun behind the fog. They were never missing. You were simply too loud to hear them. This is why silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of space. A space where the soul stretches, where truth can rise unfiltered, where the divine, patient and timeless, waits to be heard. The ancients knew this. The sages, monks, prophets, they all sought silence, not because they feared the world, but because they longed to hear something deeper than the world's voice. Whether in monasteries, mountaintops, caves, deserts, or quiet early mornings, they understood silence is not emptiness. Silence is sacred ground. It is the meeting place between spirit and source. We have replaced this holy ground with a digital altar. Instead of seeking God in stillness, we seek dopamine in distraction. But distraction is not just a thief of time. It is a thief of destiny, because without silence, you live your life reacting to the world, never responding to your soul. Silence is a mirror, and that is why so many fear it. Because when all distractions fade, what remains is you, raw, unfiltered, unmasked, all the thoughts you've suppressed, all the emotions you've buried, all the truths you've delayed. They rise, but do not be afraid of what surfaces in silence. That is where healing begins. That is where revelation lives. That is where you meet yourself, and in doing so, begin to meet the one who made you. Shi Heng Yi often reminds us that the body and mind must be trained not just in movement, but in stillness. In the martial tradition, silence is discipline. It is not a void, but a container. A warrior who cannot sit still has no clarity. A seeker who cannot be alone cannot find truth. And a soul that avoids silence will never hear the subtle call of the divine. God speaks in many ways, through people, through nature, through scripture, through signs. But the most intimate channel, the one designed just for you, is in your inner stillness. That's where he reveals what no book can teach, what no sermon can repeat. Direct, living truth. The quieter you become, the more you begin to hear. But this kind of hearing is not with the ears. It is deeper. It is the type of listening that allows wisdom to settle into your being, not just your brain. A listening that rearranges your direction without saying a word. If you've been asking for answers and receiving silence, perhaps the silence is the answer. If you feel disconnected, anxious, or uncertain, it may not be because God is distant. It may be because you are too crowded internally to sense his nearness. In that case, the first step is not to ask louder. It is to become quieter. We have been conditioned to believe that time is generous, that it waits patiently as we hesitate, delay, procrastinate, that somehow we will always have later, later to change, later to start, later to become who we were meant to be. But the truth is far more sobering. Time is not compassionate. It moves forward, always forward, without asking for your readiness. Every moment you hesitate is a moment lost. Every delay in action is a silent agreement with regret. And yet, most people don't understand this until time has already taken everything it once offered. We say things like, "I'm not ready," or "I'll start when I'm in a better place." But readiness is not a condition time waits for. Readiness is a decision, one you make in the present, not in some imagined future where all stars align. The stars don't align for those who wait. They align for those who move, who act, who step forward in faith. June 25, 2025 is not just a date. It is a symbol, a spiritual checkpoint, a line drawn in the unseen realm between intention and manifestation. Between preparation and consequence, it does not mark the end of the world. It marks the shift in your world. Whether that shift elevates or dismantles you depends on what you are doing right now. Shi Heng Yi often says that time is a mirror. It reflects not what you wish for, but what you honor. If you honor distraction, time will multiply your distractions. If you honor discipline, time will multiply your mastery. Time does not ask who you want to be, it amplifies who you already are consistently, relentlessly. And if you continue to spend your hours numb, scrolling, escaping, floating, then you are teaching time to carry you away from purpose. Days become weeks, weeks become years, and suddenly you don't recognize the person you've become. So many wait for a dramatic awakening. But awakenings don't usually come with thunder. They come quietly, when you realize you've wasted too many mornings, when the weight of unused potential becomes unbearable, when something inside of you says, "This can't be it." But even then, we often negotiate with time. We say, "Just a little longer." But time doesn't listen to negotiations. It responds only to alignment. If you knew with certainty that your window to shift your life was closing, would you still waste your next morning? Would you still avoid the hard conversations, the disciplined routines, the uncomfortable steps toward growth? Would you still numb your spirit with busyness and call it productivity? You see, the danger is not that time runs out. The danger is that your soul adapts to delay, that you become comfortable in disconnection. That numbness becomes normal, that apathy becomes identity, and so while time moves forward, you remain stuck in cycles, thinking it's fate, when really, it's just unexamined decisions made under the illusion of plenty of time. But time is not infinite. Not for you, not for this version of you. Each version of yourself has a window, an appointed time to rise, to evolve, to listen, to move. Miss that window, and that version dies, and you're left haunted, not by what happened, but by what could have. Because the heaviest burden is not failure. It is potential unmet. It is the weight of all that could have been, had you acted when your soul told you to. The spiritual world doesn't operate on our clocks. It operates on divine timing, and when that timing arrives, when the call is issued, you either move or you miss. Time will not repeat the invitation in the same way again, not because God is cruel, but because life is too dynamic to hold space for your delay forever. If you've been feeling like time is running out, it's because something within you knows the clock has started ticking. In a world that glorifies freedom without boundaries, it's become easy to confuse indulgence with liberation. We are told to follow our feelings, to do what makes us comfortable, to avoid what feels hard. But this path, paved with short-term comfort, leads us far from clarity and deeper into chaos, because true clarity, true inner strength does not come from comfort. It comes from discipline. Discipline is not a punishment. It is a form of self-respect. It is the act of choosing structure over impulse. It is the moment you say, "My future matters more than my mood." Shi Heng Yi teaches that mastery of the body leads to mastery of the mind. And mastery of the mind is what clears the path for divine insight. You cannot hear sacred instructions in a body governed by laziness, in a mind led by whims. Your physical state, your habits, your daily routines, they are the gatekeepers of your spiritual signal. Discipline is not about restriction. It's about alignment. When you wake up with purpose, when you train the body, still the mind, and honor your daily commitments, you are not just becoming more productive. You are preparing the vessel. You are sharpening the instrument that God can use. You are aligning yourself with the higher frequency where divine messages flow clearly. And yet, many people wait for revelation without preparation. They want breakthroughs but resist the very actions that make them ready for one. They ask for clarity while living in disorder, but a cluttered life creates a cluttered spirit, and in a cluttered spirit, truth gets muffled. You cannot binge on distractions all day and expect to receive direction from the divine at night. You cannot neglect your temple, your body, and expect to carry the weight of a spiritual calling. You cannot float aimlessly through the hours and expect your life to reveal sacred purpose. Discipline is sacred. It is a spiritual technology. It trains you to hold yourself still long enough for God's whispers to land. It makes you consistent, sharp, grounded. It is the repeated decision to put your higher self in charge, even when the lower self protests. And here's what few understand. Clarity often hides behind resistance. The things you avoid, early mornings, stillness, solitude, physical training, delayed gratification, are often the doors to the very clarity you've been begging for. But those doors are guarded by discomfort. Only the disciplined pass through. Shi Heng Yi reminds us that real training is not just martial or physical. It is internal. It is the daily repetition of becoming who you say you want to be. And when discipline becomes your lifestyle, you no longer need motivation. You no longer seek signs. You become a sign. You radiate order. You reflect purpose. You embody the very message others are searching for. In this state, divine clarity flows not as a rare insight, but as a natural rhythm. You wake up and know what to do. You move with conviction. You say no to what drains you. You say yes to what aligns with your mission, even when it's uncomfortable. Without discipline, life happens to you. With discipline, life flows through you. And most importantly, when God is ready to move, He looks for a vessel that is prepared, stable, and strong. Discipline doesn't just build the vessel. It proves you're ready to be filled. There is a knowing within you that no teacher can implant, no book can bestow, and no world can erase. It is deeper than intellect, older than memory, and wiser than emotion. It is the soul's knowing, the quiet truth that remains even when everything else is uncertain, and though it may lie buried under layers of distraction, denial, or fear, it never disappears. It waits patiently, enduring your detours, your compromises, your delays, because it knows it will outlast them all. We are living in an age of excessive seeking. People jump from one source to another, one philosophy to another, hoping that something external will provide the break through they crave. But the irony is this: the answers you're chasing were never outside of you. They've been whispering from within, subtle, persistent, and often inconvenient, not because they are hidden, but because we've trained ourselves not to hear them. The truth is, your soul already knows when you are misaligned. It knows when you're not living with integrity. It knows when you're staying too long in places you've outgrown. It knows when you're shrinking to avoid judgment or lying to avoid discomfort, and it knows, painfully well, what you must release if you truly want peace. But we numb this inner knowing with noise, with endless activity, with rationalizations and justifications. We build complex narratives to defend a life that doesn't fulfill us, because we fear the cost of change. We surround ourselves with distractions not because we love them, but because they silence the voice we are too afraid to obey. That voice is not loud, but it is relentless. It speaks in the pit of your stomach when something feels off. It speaks in your anxiety before a decision you know isn't right. It speaks in the tightness in your chest when you stay somewhere your spirit has outgrown. And it speaks in the sadness that quietly creeps in when you avoid your purpose for one more day. We often tell ourselves we're confused, but confusion is often just a cover for avoidance. Deep down, you know when a relationship is draining you. You know when your habits are keeping you small. You know when you're wasting your gifts, your time, your energy. You know when you're out of sync with your values. You know, but knowing is not the hard part. Acting on that knowing is. Shi Heng Yi teaches that clarity comes when we stop asking the world to confirm what the soul has already made clear. Because the truth is not something we find, it's something we stop denying. The longer you wait to honor that inner truth, the heavier your spirit becomes. The weight you carry each day is not from your responsibilities, it's from the truth you're suppressing. And this suppression has a cost. It steals your peace, it dulls your energy, it lowers your vibration, and slowly it silences your connection with the divine. But that knowing doesn't go away, it stays. And in still moments, in quiet hours, when all distractions fall away, it surfaces again. That inner voice, soft but firm, says, "You were made for more than this." And you hear it not with your ears, but with your being. It's not a thought. It's not a feeling. It's something deeper. It's the remembering of who you are beneath the masks, beneath the conditioning, beneath the fear. And while the mind is fast to question, the soul is never uncertain. It doesn't debate. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't argue. It simply reveals, and once something is revealed, it cannot be unseen. You can deny it, you can delay it, but you cannot forget it, because the truth, once awakened, waits for your alignment. We often speak about inner peace, divine clarity, and spiritual awakening as if they are purely individual pursuits, unaffected by our surroundings, but what many overlook is that environment shapes energy, and energy shapes destiny. You are not just a product of your intentions, you are also a product of the voices you allow around you. Just as a clear signal can be drowned in static, your divine intuition, your inner compass, can be weakened, distorted, or even silenced by the wrong company. You may feel confused about your path not because you're off course, but because you're surrounded by people whose frequency is too low to support your rising. You may doubt your vision not because it's wrong, but because those closest to you cannot see what your soul was shown. You were never meant to carry your calling in a space where it must constantly be defended, explained, or diluted. And yet, how often do we betray our spirit for the sake of staying connected to familiarity? Shi Heng Yi teaches that association is transmission. Every person you interact with is transmitting a certain vibration. Through their thoughts, words, beliefs, and behaviors, some lift you, some drain you. Some sharpen you, some blur you, and over time, those transmissions either strengthen your signal to the divine or distort it to the point that you begin questioning your own inner truth. If you surround yourself with people who mock discipline, you will slowly lose respect for your own structure. If you walk with those who normalize negativity, you will begin to filter life through a lens of limitation. If you open yourself to constant drama, gossip, or spiritual dullness, your soul will start to dim itself to match the room. Not all toxic environments are aggressive or obvious. Some are subtle. Some feel comfortable simply because they are familiar. But comfort is not the same as compatibility, and familiarity is not the same as alignment. Your circle is not just social, it is spiritual architecture. Every conversation plants something in your mind. Every energy field you interact with leaves an imprint, and eventually these imprints begin shaping your decisions, your direction, and your destiny. Many people pray for clarity, for divine messages, for spiritual sensitivity, but they remain surrounded by emotional static. They keep company with the unawakened, the bitter, the jealous, the scattered, and wonder why their soul feels muted. You cannot hear a higher signal while living in lower frequencies. Your circle matters, not because you're better than anyone, but because your alignment is sacred, because your calling is delicate, because the version of you that you're becoming cannot survive in the same ecosystem that tolerated your past. And this isn't just about cutting people off. It's about conscious filtering. Who gets access to your time? Who speaks into your dreams? Who gets to influence your emotional state? These are spiritual decisions, not social ones. In some seasons, your circle must grow smaller so your vision can grow sharper. In some seasons, solitude becomes a requirement, not for loneliness, but for recalibration. When the divine wants to prepare you for more, the first thing it often does is prune your connections, not to punish you, but to purify your path. You will notice it, people falling away, conversations no longer resonating, invitations starting to feel like interruptions. That's not rejection. That's refinement. That's your soul outgrowing the limitations it once called normal. And if you ignore these subtle shifts, if you continue to walk with those whose presence clouds your signal, you begin to pay a price far greater than discomfort. You begin to lose clarity. You begin to lose conviction. You begin to feel distant from the very guidance that once felt so clear, not because the guidance left, but because it can no longer find you in the noise of the crowd. So if your path feels heavy, if your peace feels disturbed, if your soul feels unclear, look not only within, but around. There is a point in every journey where effort is no longer enough, where strategy, knowledge, and willpower reach their limits. And in that sacred space, where striving dissolves and ego softens, the real transformation begins, because growth in its highest form is not just about doing more, it's about learning how to surrender. But surrender is misunderstood. We often associate surrender with weakness, with giving up, with passive acceptance of whatever happens. But surrender in the spiritual sense is not collapse. It is not defeat. It is a conscious release of resistance, a willing loosening of the grip we've kept around our own limitations. It is the strength to stop clinging to the illusion of control and open ourselves to a higher design that far exceeds our understanding. Shi Heng Yi reminds us that just as the body must yield in order to absorb impact, the soul must yield in order to receive wisdom, because as long as we are fighting reality, we are unavailable for revelation. As long as we are forcing, resisting, calculating, we remain too full of self to be filled with spirit. Most people never grow not because they lack strength, but because they lack surrender. They want change, but on their terms. They want breakthroughs, but without breakdowns. They want to walk new paths, but only if they can bring all their old patterns along. But growth requires a kind of death, not a death of the body, but of the false identity. The performer, the pleaser, the one who must always be in control, the one who fears uncertainty, the one who defines success by stability rather than surrender. These parts of us must be surrendered, not out of rejection, but out of reverence for what we are becoming. There is a sacred intelligence in the unknown, a wisdom that moves beneath circumstances, orchestrating lessons far beyond what we can perceive, but you cannot receive that wisdom if you're gripping too tightly to your plans. The tighter you hold, the more rigid you become, and in that rigidity, you become resistant to divine movement. You miss the subtle redirections. You fight what was meant to free you. Surrender is not the loss of direction. It is the realignment with true direction. It is the quiet courage to say, I may not know what's coming, but I trust what is guiding me. It is the humility to allow life to unfold without needing to control every outcome. It is the spiritual maturity to recognize that sometimes the breakdown is the breakthrough in disguise, and make no mistake, surrender is not a one-time act. It is a daily discipline. Every morning we wake up with a choice. Will I push against what I fear, or will I align with what is real? Will I defend my comfort, or will I release my resistance to truth? Will I obey my fear or trust the unfolding path that my soul recognizes even when my mind does not? This is the true test, because the path to purpose does not always make sense. It will not always feel secure, it will rarely be comfortable, and it will often ask you to walk forward without answers. But in surrender, answers become less important than alignment. You begin to care less about where you are going, and more about who is guiding you. You stop needing proof and start living from trust. You begin to feel the weight of control leaving your shoulders, not because the path is easy, but because you are no longer walking it alone. There is a version of you that is only born through surrender, a version that cannot be strategized into existence, a version that emerges, not when you add more to your life, but when you finally release what no longer belongs to it. The divine is not asking for perfection. The divine is asking for permission. Permission to lead, to reshape, to transform, not by force, but by invitation. You've heard the message, not from me, but from that deep place within you, that's been trying to get your attention for far too long. This is not about fear. This is about awareness. It is not about a calendar date. It is about the condition of your soul. The signs have been subtle. The nudges have been soft. But when the soul refuses to listen to whispers, life begins to shout. And God, in His infinite wisdom, is not shouting to scare you. He is awakening you to something greater. June 25, 2025 is not a deadline. It is a doorway, and what you do before you reach it determines who walks through it. Will it be the version of you that's distracted, exhausted, and disconnected? Or will it be the version of you that chose silence over noise, discipline over comfort, surrender over fear? This is not the time to delay. This is the time to return to your breath, your purpose, your soul, to cleanse your circle, to obey the truth you already know, to stop negotiating with time, and finally align with the path that's been calling you since the beginning. Because the greatest tragedy is not that we miss the sign, it's that we convince ourselves it wasn't meant for us, but it was. This message is not for the masses, it's for you, so listen, align, and step through the doorway before it closes.